Okay, and we have recordings going now. Thank you, Yaris, for that. So, without any further ado, to start the debate, very proud to call upon the Prime Minister. Woo.
Hi, is this audible?
Yeah.
Good. Um, Starting in three, two, three things in the speech. Firstly, this is going to be done well. But before that, an example. The West is a huge, huge area. It's not just the US, UK, Australia, Canada. It also looks like states like Iceland, which incentivize people to go ahead and settle there, bring their family in 10 years time frame. They reward you with cash bonuses and things like that. There's a huge market out there which is suffering from low fertility rates and which desperately needs cheap labor like us Indians, and they're willing to give us a good deal for that. That's what we stand for on opening government. Firstly, then, why is this going to be done incredibly well? Four things. First, you plan carefully, right? This is a high threshold. You're leaving your families. So, presumably, you plan, you go ahead and check the areas. What is the backup plan that I can fall to? Is there some contact that I've established earlier? Is there someone in the community who has done this earlier and things like that? So this is done well by them. But secondly, there are industry built around this. Employers of people or mates who have already left for these countries give incentives for them. It's like a referral scheme. But secondly, the governments do this all the time, like the Iceland government. But thirdly, there are specific educational courses which make you well equipped for some countries. Like if you go to Germany from India, there are certain sets like STEM courses that you enroll into, and German universities give some preference to it. I don't exactly know how that works, but Germany has a lot of preference for Indian scientists and engineers and things like that. The fourth thing is that this migration is done en masse. So they can't say that you will be lonely or there can't be people who you can't like celebrate festivals with. There is a certain established cultural diaspora that you already have. And
I'm sorry, it got muted.
uh, so sorry, I'm debating on my phone and I got a call. Uh, my bad. Uh, Restarting in three, two, one. Yeah, the way that you immigrate is you go to a country where you already have a lot of people. But even if it's a new country, you are breaking new ground. It happens with a lot of people. I'll go with 100 other people so that there's some kind of psychological support system and things like that. Communities can talk about this and all those kinds of things. And fourthly, there are several countries that I've already told you about. This is not a restricted debate as like an off-bench can't claim it that way. Secondly, on the counterfactual, what exactly happens? We think the most likely counterfactual in this debate is that you do not immigrate out of fear. Notice this is true for four reasons. First, it's just impossible to immigrate with your entire family for two key reasons. A, it's a lot of money to immigrate your entire family, but it's also extremely uncertain that without establishing any certain base, I'm taking them there. What will happen if someone takes away my child? What will happen if my emotional base or emotional support gets corroded? Then it's extremely difficult for people to keep their like hopes high up and things like that. That's why the risk averse when it comes to things like this. But secondly, we think that like these are extremely difficult ways in and shady and illegal ways in often which you go to these countries. It's not always the safest way. So we think that people are more akin to testing this first than going ahead and doing this themselves. But thirdly, the problem is that when you leave your families, there might be problems back home. Your child is growing without a father or a mother. Your partners can cheat, emotional distance can grow, and things like that. So the counterfactual is that you do not immigrate out of fear. Why does this like uniquely get resolved on our side of the house? We think when there are opportunities that are shown to these people clearly, that is when these people have an incentive to go ahead and migrate. And that's the next thing that I'm going to prove. Why back home things are so terrible, and why there's even a 20-30% chance of success when this model operates, and why that's enough to shift the rationale towards going ahead and migrating. Firstly, why is it good even if 20% or 30% success chance exists? Three things. Firstly, we think connections or network effects are massive. I know someone who knows someone who can get me a job. And this is often the case because that person went through the exact same process that I went through. They know that this is really important to keep the community together, and I can maybe cash in or bank in on that favor someday or the other. But secondly, we think the remittance is great, right? The currency I'm earning in there is extremely, extremely stable because it's a Western country ruled by Western institutions and things like that. But secondly, it's a better foreign exchange rate. So the currency that I earn in is significantly more. So the remittances that I send back home are really, really good and really, really like just like big in quantum. But thirdly, we think that the strengthens communities, right? People who go outside, they can do initiatives for their own home ground and things like that. This looks like Satya Nadella and like a lot of Silicon Valley CEOs like launching a lot of initiative programs in Indian schools about STEM, going ahead and launching adult tinkering labs to, I don't know, like just spur some kind of scientific thinking and innovation in school children and things like that. These are wholly funded by these CSR initiatives, and this only happened when the diaspora shift in the upper management of these companies happened. People care about these communities and giving back to where they came from. We think you fund tuitions for people, you have some grants instituted in your name and things like that. But back home, if no one migrates, and even the 20-30% of like this chance is lost, why is it terribly bad? Three things. Firstly, we think you're forever stuck in a cycle of no skill education because of the massive saturation that is there. Note that these countries often suffer from a population explosion because there was no correct family planning because of the distorted ways in which their institutions were left in the wake of colonialism and by like other neo-colonialist approaches and things like that. So people did not know better and raised families not knowing that the cost of like just bearing them is extremely hard. They erred on this, like they didn't err on the side of caution and thought that an extra hand to earn is probably more like better, and the emotional support that this kids is like good, rational enough to go ahead and raise them and things like that. But secondly, we think there's a lot of corruption in these countries, right? What does that mean? That means labor codes are extremely terrible. Welfare money for upskilling you that should come in directly into your bank account goes through 14 middlemen, and like the 1% of the intended amount comes to your bank accounts and things like that. That means the degree of exploitation is very bad at home because the checks and balances are failing and there's a massive population you need to cater to versus a country which needs you and hence lesser exploitation. See you. Cool. Lastly, four reasons on why the degree of exploitation is just much less. I'll show you the incentive structure that these countries have for you. Three reasons. First, these are developed countries, so the cost of living there is huge. So parents, especially this generation of parents, don't want to raise families because it's extremely expensive. They want to spend money on themselves. There are incredibly low fertility rates, especially in US and UK and things like that. People are dying faster than the rate at which babies are born each day and things like that. But secondly, we think COVID massively fucked all of us because of initiatives like zero COVID. We had to shut down factories. We need to rejuvenate factories. We need to rejuvenate all these industries, and we need massive amount of workers for these. And the workers from these industry, like countries like India, are just great, right? They're cheap. So it's not that they're in a negotiating position to argue for better salaries or things like that. They work for cheaper. But secondly, the diversity in hiring, right? This is just two things. You can back in on their network effects. If you are expanding a project into India, you can send them as the country manager and things like that. Countries do care about these things because they increase the efficiency of those corporations and all those kinds of things. We have shown you that the degree of exploitation is much less because you do this well and the countries want you. But secondly, you break out of that vicious cycle of poverty, which cannot happen in any other country.
Yeah, we thank the speaker for that speech and to continue the debate. Very proud to call upon leader of opposition. Oh.
Cool. Just checking I can be heard.
Yeah.
Great. I want to be very, very clear about opening opposition's exact stance in this debate. We oppose the migrate to educate to migrate model, but that does not mean that we need to oppose every single component of it. What we are going to say is that people going abroad to send back remittances is fine and is totally okay for us to defend within the topic, but that the second half of the model, which is that the people who then get educated leave, is really, really harmful. And I want to say that this is the most likely alternative as well, for the reason that these people still need to send remittances back home, and that is something that is very urgent. It is something that is very material, and these people still have incentives to do. The change is that at the final step, when the people who have been educated are wondering whether or not to stay home and get a good job or to go to the West in search for another job, they decide not to, and they stay at home. This is realistic, it is within the motion, and it means that like 6 minutes of PM speech suddenly goes up in smoke because we are totally happy with people sending back remittances. All of the stuff about currency exchange, blah, 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 that's all great. We think that when those people are then educated, they should stay in the countries in which they grew up and were educated. So, but I'm also going to, if you don't believe that, I'm going to explain why all of it is also bad, but just cover my back. So, first argument, why brain drain is really bad. what are the kinds of people that we are talking about, the people that get educated and then would move under their side of the house? These are people who are particularly educated, which is far rarer in these places where remittances are so important. Especially the kinds of people who could get good skilled jobs in the West are the kinds of people that are particularly rare and are particularly valuable. These are the doctors, engineers, lawyers, politicians, entrepreneurs who can create employment in these places. Those are the people that are moving, because not that many, less of a proportion of the population in these areas has a bachelor's degree, has a master's degree, has that kind of experience. Why is this very, very important? There are three particular reasons. Firstly, it is because these are the people who can make the far greatest marginal contribution in these countries. They are needed far more because the industries in which they would work are the ones that are the most understaffed, the ones that are underskilled relative to other countries in the world. These are the places that don't have enough doctors to take care of all of the sick people in that country. They are the kinds of people who would get higher up positions in these places, so they have far more capacity to help. So maybe in the West, they're an engineer and they would work as some grunt as a cog in a production chain, but in these countries, they're more likely to be the head of that company, or they're more likely to be the leader on that project, which means that they have far more capacity to actually help out. Secondly, because having these experts in those home countries is a prerequisite for development in the long term. That is to say, it is very, very difficult to actually expand into a tech-based economy if it is the case that all the engineers and all of the software developers and all of the people who know how to use that technology no longer live in that country. It is far more difficult to create a robust healthcare infrastructure when all of the policymakers, when all of the surgeons, when all of the people that would actually make that a thriving thing in the long run leave your country. Thirdly, because brain drain is a self-perpetuating cycle. When more and more experts leave, it means that it puts more pressure on the people that are left behind to leave as well. Because you as a surgeon don't want to work in a healthcare system where there aren't that many professionals around you that you actually respect, where your job is really, really hard because there aren't enough people to distribute the work around, which means that when some people leave, it pressures more people that would otherwise have stayed to leave. So it is a self-perpetuating cycle. I think you need to weigh this argument extraordinarily highly in the round. Firstly, on pragmatics. Even if you buy all of the OG impacts that this is particularly good for the person that leaves, you need to weigh that against the very direct practical harms that you cause to thousands and thousands of people. When patients don't have a qualified doctor that can look after their wounds, that is really bad. When people don't have access to good teachers and so they can't educate themselves into the long run, that is bad for far more people. But secondly, in terms of freedom, maybe they'll be like, well, they make the choice to leave and that's a legitimate choice. But think about the freedom you're impacting of all the people who can't leave. It is constraining on your freedom if you're sick and you don't have a doctor. It is constraining on your freedom if you want to get educated, but there aren't enough teachers in that country. On a balance of a principled balance, you ought to also give this debate to opening opposition. But I also want to note that there is an independent impact on that person as well. And I'm going now to prove why it is bad for that person to leave. Because if it is a case, as you believe my characterization, that these are people that are particularly qualified, that would be making a lot of money in their home country, that would be in the upper echelons of that society because they're one of the few that have actually had a good university education, then it means that they are like in the top 10% or the top 5% of that country. And if it is the case that that country has a far lower living cost, which opening government says, they are probably just going to be living like a king. In most cases, I think it is just the most rational choice for that person to stay at home. But even if you don't buy that and you think that we need to oppose all of it, note that all of this model, you know that the first step of migration also results in a harmful brain drain because they might be working as blue-collar workers in the West, but usually they are relatively talented and useful at home as well. For example, in New York City, you have like more Iranian doctors driving taxis than you have doctors that stayed in Iran, right? Like a lot of these people are just really smart and have a lot of qualifications, but when they move, they have to take blue-collar jobs, right? Which means that if they had stayed in that home country, they would have been very, very useful, or at least on a marginal comparative basis, would have been contributed far more to society. So even if you believe all of the benefits of OG, or actually, before I go into that, I'll take closing.
The motion is for the children to be in a position to migrate, not necessarily migrate. We don't have to defend them actually migrating, just being skilled enough to do so.
Well, that's a pretty cowardly interpretation of the motion. That means that knifes all of OG's benefits. So, I don't know, I'll let you settle that one. So even if you believe all of the benefits of OG in terms of these people get on company boards and then they're like, the company becomes less racist or whatever, that is an indirect impact, whereas we are giving more direct impact to the people that are suffering, the most vulnerable people in the society that these people leave behind. So on a balance of directness of impact, you also ought to give this debate to opening opposition. Secondly, we think that on our side, we are far more likely to improve circumstances and conditions within the country. Because note, if people send back remittances and people rely on remittances, this is if you believe that we have to defend not supporting any of the model. That's really bad because it puts political pressure off of the government to actually improve services and opportunities if it is the case that people have an alternative, which is to send back remittances, which means that governments are far less likely to feel the urgency to improve education opportunities, to improve access to that and make it cheaper for people. It means that they are far less likely to have an incentive to make their services better and to invest in those kinds of things. For all those reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
We thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call upon Deputy Prime Minister. Woo.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First, I'm going to take the highest burden OO prevents to us. Even if it's the case that these nations get worse as a result of brain drain, and all we do is we give a few million people better lives, why is that fine? First of all, people aren't instruments, and I really do mean that OO has to deal with this comparative. Effectively, what they're saying is that they're going to use these people and make them have significantly more difficult lives in their own countries, which I will prove in a second, in order to make sure that other people benefit. I don't think that's how rights work. People should be able to get a better life for themselves and make their own lives better, which is an immense, certain, and big claim that we should care about in this debate. The speculative possibility of these people benefiting their country is very low. The reason for this will become more clear in my debate, but this framing needs to stay in terms of how certain our impact is, the fact that these people matter, even if they do harm in some speculative ways, some parts of other people's benefits, and so on. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is explain why I think LO completely misunderstands our case. Our point is this is the only model that creates migration in the first place. The first thing we told you is that if you can't plan to bring your family there, you won't immigrate at all for all the reasons that Sai has gave you, which have received no response, which is why most people don't emigrate unless they believe they can bring their families in the first place. Often people are terrified of leaving their homes. The reason that this is exceptionally useful is because of the mechanism Sai gives about demand from other nations, which means often people stay in their own countries because they're scared of going abroad. So all of the benefits of just the money coming back by itself is unique to our side. The reasons for this are also more extensive than what Sai says and much more important than what OO understands. The first thing I want to point out is that if people do not migrate in order to bring their families abroad, the people who do migrate are the ones who don't have a family to take care of, often bachelors and people who have somewhat lesser skills who will be picked over by people who do have a family. Why is this bad? It's because these people never fucking come back. They never come back if their kids don't get into this country, and hence that creates certain brain drain, and these people don't have any incentive to send money back either. Often they're out striking their own fortune. Perhaps they pay their mom, but they generally want to live their life in other places. So in instances where we send a family person there, there's significantly more connections, so remittances have better benefits. Okay, this means that a lot of the migration stuff does need to be dealt with by opening opposition and has huge impacts. The weighing on this is going to come in the second part, which is I'm going to then explain to you why you having a job abroad is significantly better than having a job locally. This will also apply to the kid who will presumably possibly get in migration. The first thing I want to point out is locally, these countries are fucking overpopulated like crazy. In most places like Kenya and Nigeria, the poverty rate has often risen because there's large amounts of birth rates because people don't have birth control. And all the reasons Sai told you, they don't understand how expensive kids are. And hence often simply the government cannot provide for all of them. So often when families leave these countries and other countries take care of these families, that is an immense benefit because these are blue collar workers, often bringing their family in. They're not going to become CEOs of companies. They're just going to become technicians or engineers working outside of that. And hence that opens up resources that can be used locally and helps the people remaining. But second of all, there's bad regulation locally. The companies can't use this talent even if you do stay in the first place, which means often there's restrictions to how these companies can work and increased bureaucracy where government bureaucrats can effectively use corruption to make companies not work. So local jobs aren't a good alternative. But second of all, there's immense things like nepotism and discrimination, like say the caste system in India, which makes it difficult for a blue collar caste worker to work at all because they're simply seen as so unclean they cannot be hired. And third of all, it looks like less funding because these people often have restricted capital markets. So the businesses don't have the money required to compete and hence often fail and suffer significantly during economic shocks. And fourth of all, it's because you literally just cannot use your talent very well when there aren't people who can spot it. So often it is very difficult to use the skills that you might have learned in university if the company you're at isn't operating at that level. So the education you get for a high-level engineer is put into a low-level accountant job. All of this means that when you don't look at opportunities abroad, when you don't aim for companies that are MNCs, when you don't look at a possibility in America, often this 20 to 30%, we will concede, not all of them will migrate, gets no benefit on our side. Let's impact this and explain why this is better on our side. The first thing I want to point out is the entrepreneurs, the skills they're talking about, the self-perpetuating cycle they're talking about is better on our side for a few reasons. The first thing I want to point out is when these people move, they create significantly more expertise in that specific country that they came from, which means that a lot of these kids who are going to places like Europe now create an incentive for these companies to continue investing in these areas because they have a lot of workers from a place like India or from a place like Kenya or Nigeria or so on. As a result, this makes it easier for these places to expand into that market. That means that there's more jobs for everyone when someone works in that company. The comparative is that these people work in local companies and don't get hired by MNCs because the possibility of you expanding is significantly lower when you don't have a huge amount of skilled people from other nations in your company helping you expand in the first place. Note the scale of this motion, right? This is billions and often millions of people attempting this, and at the point where that entire flow stops, that connection to that country is lower, and it's simply a risky investment which might not make you money. But second of all, it's also true that this means that the people who do immigrate significantly earn much more money according to their own analysis, right? The companies in the West earn more money, so the remittances they send back also get higher over time, which is a certain benefit which doesn't depend on corrupt government officials using tax revenue effectively or a community actually respecting you despite all the discriminatory and nepotistic practices that occur. So not only does this create a large-scale impact where companies want to invest in your nation, it also creates a generic impact where these people generally have more money and connections can help the people back home. So often a local company won't help people who are poor, but the person having more money will help their community back home. Before that, CEO quickly.
Yes, if these people come from such terrible impoverished environment, how can they educate themselves on safe migration practice, and how can they negotiate human rights in their blue-collar job deals?
Okay, first of all, I want to point out that this actually leads to my second point, which is that they have a significantly better chance of getting any job when they aim for education, and why that's comparative. Well, the first obvious thing is they don't educate people because there's no aim for them at the point where there's a hugely saturated labor market. Learning engineering in India is seen as a way to have mobility, but learning a high-skilled job, for example, like consultancy for like economics, or for example, things like dentistry, which are seen as valuable in other countries, is hard to break into because there just isn't that much demand for these skilled jobs. That's why the education happens at all, which gets them those benefits, because these people don't see it as valuable without the system. Second, the reason they get good labor regulations is because, newsflash, the labor regulations in America for migrants are legitimately better than the labor regulations in places like India or Kenya, because the governments still protect their citizens. The reason for this is that if a business hires immigrants, another business hires immigrants, and the other business that is hiring immigrants is not paying them correctly, the other business gets a competitive advantage. So there's often a push to make sure the labor regulations are followed effectively, so businesses are not unfairly like discriminated against based on fucking over people and being corrupt, which means you get more certain money. That means you might not get your income at all on our side, on their side. You might get corruption in the sense that your income doesn't rise at all. And the second you have like a crisis or something at home, you won't have the money to pay for it because people haven't given you that in the first place. On that opening comment.
We thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Cool. Can you hear me? Is this fine?
Yeah.
Nice. Where's my phone? I'm going to spend a lot of this speech rebutting OG, and then I'm going to prove to you why it is the case that Aidan's frame wins the debate. So let's begin with OG. The first thing they do is do this really well done framing, which is that you plan well and the government helps you and you're going to have great communities there, which they think helps them frame why the people are going to have a good life there. But note that that's actually an argument that helps our side because it proves that you get the best people even more incentive to leave their communities at home and to leave the places where they come from, where they could have a meaningful difference upon the lives of everyone. But more importantly, what OG claims in this debate is that life at home is going to be horrendous and bad, and you A, have a right to leave, and B, it's better for you to leave. The reasons they give for this are twofold. Number one, it's overpopulation, as in there's just too many people in the country at home and you don't have enough space in education. I think firstly, Aidan's preempts this, right? Like within the argument, it is inbuilt that you will still get an education because your like family member has still gone. The point is that you also don't go. But secondly, I just want to point out that this notion that these people are just going to be en masse non-educated is quite false. Like think about it. Oftentimes, government facilities and capacity catches up with these booms in population. The reason for that is because it is in their interest to capitalize on that, right? Think about India, for instance, where you've had a massive population boom, but now you have booming tech universities, and a lot of schools that prepare really good fucking software engineers and great universities growing specifically as a result of wanting to cater to that population boom. Like, I just don't think it's the case that just because now you may have like more people quantitatively that you can fit in classrooms, it means that you're never going to have enough capacity to fit all of these people. I think it's likely that the government and society, no thank you, adapts to this. The second reason why they say it is so bad as home is corruption, and everything is corrupt and everything is a network. And I love this point because it just gets thrown around in debates, and as a Balkan, I know it very, very well. Guys, two responses. Number one, corruption doesn't mean everything around you is corrupt. Like in Romania, politicians embezzle a fuck ton of money. That still means that people do have small businesses on the ground. That still means that people are able to create like a parallel state and build NGOs. They build fucking cancer hospitals because they create associations where they garner donations for people. All of these back home, right? Oftentimes, it also means that you have really low taxes, which means you have a great business environment for you, which means that if you have high potential as an individual, you actually have a great shot of making it at home. But also, secondly, a lot of these industries are industries which are particularly untouched by the high-level corruptions within politics. Like within a hospital, if you're a doctor, you're gonna slice the man and put the man back together. It's like you are not touched by the amount of corruption that goes on there. Even if there is some corruption, I would argue you can even trade it off to the amount of barriers you're going to face as you go towards the West, because there you're going to face a whole set of barriers against you. Things like racism, things like xenophobia, things like people not recognizing what your good is. So I just don't think it's the case that your life at home is as bad. Then they say the family member gets educated in the West and has a much better life over there, right? There's a bunch of things to do with this. Firstly, I want to break the idea that education in the West means an immediately better life. Like, even if you have some people that are like you, it is incredibly hard to live within the culture where a majority of other people are just different than you. I'm taking this opportunity to say a polite fuck you to the British. Like, that's exactly what's happening to me right now. I have communities of Balkan people, but that doesn't mean I feel like home people here. It doesn't mean I fucking love everything here, right? Particularly then, it becomes important because as an individual, you feel guilty for not being able to adapt in. Number one, because your entire family has showered you with the slogan, you're the savior of the family. Look at what your father has done, taking the blue collar job for you to go to university there. But secondly, you probably also know the personal sacrifices that have happened for you to leave. The problem is, in most of these cases, you didn't consent to it. These were decisions taken even before you were born. So the trade-off here is that some people might have a good time if they go to university abroad. Some won't. But those who won't will experience a type of such pernicious guilt that it's probably worth weighing over the former category. To this, they respond, oh, it's the people's choice. Number one, this is entirely non-interactive with Aidan's frame that choice is not just like, absolute. We are happy to trade it off. It means we enable more choice for the people that stand behind. But also, secondly, we're assessing a system as a whole. Like, this is what the motion asks us to do. And so we're trying to figure out whether this system is better. That's why sort of Aidan's point works. Then they respond to us by saying, otherwise migration is not going to happen. And the reason is out of fear, because people don't know if they'll make it in the places that they go. Number one, I just think this is firstly kind of like empirically untrue. Like people migrate for a large host of reasons just because like know the conditions. It's not the only place you go. The counter is money is often the reason why most people migrate. They go send remittances back home. Where we insert ourselves in this motion is we say, you go like as a blue collar worker, get the money, send it home, and maybe then come back to your family, get your kids to education there, but don't have the kids going there after all. To this, and I think this is going to become important, CG might say something like, it's just about being in a position to migrate, right? First of all, this kind of knifes OG, but second of all, the wording of the info slide is like, with the goal to migrate, we just support without the goal to migrate. Like this is perfectly within the motion. Don't let them like, you know, get away with it, right? Before going any further, I'll take a point from CG.
Please note, the motion is their kids are educated back home by the money the parents make abroad in order for them, for the parents' goal, for them to be able to migrate in the future. Not the kids' goal to migrate, the parents' goal.
No, it's like so you go, you get money, you send it back, the child gets educated, child goes to West and has a better job than you as a blue collar worker had. Like that's literally the motion. I won't spend more time on this. Then they say this is good for developed countries who need workers. Number one, I think a competing trend in these countries is that they're becoming heavily automated and increasingly so. So oftentimes I'm just unsure where this overlap of workers is going to be. But also secondly, like look at the fucking developing countries. They're fucking building right-wing populists and populists that push you out. Like even if it is objectively true, they're more likely not going to have a space there. Like for so that's just that with that, right? With that being said, why is it the case that we win this debate? It is incredibly simple. For some people, emigrating is going to be awesome. For some, it's going to be a terrible life. Some people will be more talented than others. Some will make more money or less at home or abroad. Some people will choose to leave. Some people will feel forced by duty to leave. The only sure impact and applicable in all cases or all renditions of the motion is that this model strips down developing nations of their talent. It ensures on net, on the comparative, that far fewer of the people that would have the potential to get that country from developing to developed stay there and make a meaningful change. That is the only impact in this debate. That is the only sure thing proven in this debate. And that is why opening opposition takes it. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue the debate and open the second half, very proud to call upon member of parliament. Woo.
One key claim from closing government in this debate, why these kids will be able to learn, and why not only will they learn, they will improve the education their peers and other kids in their countries receive. We're going to beat opening position in two ways. First, by showing you that the fact that the motion says they're in a position to migrate does not mean they will actually migrate. And the second is by telling you on net, there will be more talent in those countries even after the brain drain, because we increase the number of people who are actually learning. Please note, while OG gives you a lot of benefits of being abroad, they're not actually telling you much about the kids themselves learning, apart from they have an incentive, which they always do. So let's talk about why we think this is going to make such a big difference with education and the education of their peers. On the first level, we think the amount of pressure there is on them to learn and the amount of discipline they will exercise is much greater, because your father left in order to finance this education is a much greater and much more visible and viable incentive for a kid to learn and to understand that he needs to learn than just his parents telling it to them. It's a visible action he can emotionally understand and relate to that tells him he needs to do it. But second of all, the hope the father creates by being abroad is that he associates it with all the media the child consumes. Now, every movie he sees about life abroad becomes a dream he can reach up to. And it's a much more viable dream, a much easier to understand dream than the dreams of specific works or being an engineer or being a doctor. It's living the life you see in TV shows abroad, you hear about in newspapers, you read in books. They all have access to the internet, so they can all imagine those dreams in a very clear way. But I think not only does it create the incentive for them to do so, it creates incentives for their peers to do so. Because when you're in a school with a kid who is much more motivated to learn than you are, it's much more likely that you feel it's okay to learn, right? You are not going to be the nerdiest person in class. You're going to feel it's easier to learn. You're going to have a safe space to learn. You're going to have somebody else to study with. It means that all his friends, all the kids around this kid are likely to be putting more effort into their schooling simply because they have the example and benefit of the example he's giving, but also because he's giving them hope, right? When he has this dream, when he says, yes, my father's dream is that I will go and be a doctor abroad, he says, it's possible for me, and I'm not that different from you, right? I'm closer to you, so all those other kids can also have the incentive and hope to learn. But we think beyond the incentive and hope, it makes a significant difference to the quality of infrastructure and education that is actually available in those countries. We think on a first level, just the amount of money they can send back is far greater than the amount of money that other people have. And what is this money going to go for? It's going to go to paying to schools. What does this mean? It's going to mean that we are going to have better salaries for teachers. It's going to mean we're going to have more school buildings, more budget for labs, all of which means building more school infrastructure. And I think this is going to help even other kids on two levels. One, it just reduces the burden on the state to build their school, so it's easier for them to find a good school for other kids. But second, in most of those places, they are going to accept some scholarship students. There are going to be some students who can scrape it in and make it and enjoy the better conditions financed by the people abroad, who will be donating to these schools, who will be helping those schools. And all this will significantly increase the standards. But I think on a final level, the adult staying at home with the kids is now much more committed and interested in the education that they have. On the first level, they are much less likely to work because now they're getting significantly greater money because they're being paid by Western standards from abroad, so they have a lot more free time. And second, they have made a promise to their significant other that they're going to take care of the children's education. They're going to be expected to tell them how it was. They're going to report back and tell them how it is. So they're going to be following up on schools. What are they learning? They're going to be going to the teachers. They're going to be taking the curricula, which means there is going to be much more parental involvement in making sure that everything is working correctly. And this is very significant because the easiest thing for teachers to do when there is nobody who actually cares about education is just give up. But when there is actual pressure on them to progress, they A, can't give up, but B, they have a reason to do so, right? They have a reason to teach because they know some students are actually learning. They know some parents actually care. And this is going to affect all the other students because when the teachers are teaching, some of the other students at least are going to be listening and capable of enjoying the benefits that are coming with this. Why do we think this is massively significant? Well, I think A, it's important to understand that all this improvement in infrastructure, in education, all the teachers who stayed at home and started the career teaching there are going to be staying there. And this expanded scope of education is going to significantly increase the number of people who get quality education. And I think this is very significant. It's much greater than brain drain because opening a position does not prove to you at any point that the number of people who are going to be educated is limited or stays the same. We think in any side of the house, the number of people migrating is not 50%, it's not even 20%, but the number of people being educated can be 20%, it can be 30%, right? The number of people educated in India is no longer the 2% it was 50 years ago, it's now 30%. The number of people educated in most Western countries is over 50%. So we can increase the number of people that are educated by much greater number than any could possibly migrate. Before I continue opening a position,
yeah, what is more likely? When you make a lot of money in the West, do you build a school at home or do you just send it to your loved ones who use their money for personal reasons instead of giving it to everyone around them?
Please note the motion specifically says education back at home. So those students are going to be studying at home, which means they're going to be paid for their schools. But second, yes, we do think people care about the communities they grew up with, in the places they left behind, in the friends that those adult people have that are still back at home, with the family members they have that are still back at home, and they're going to care about their education as well, right? So yes, I think it's perfectly plausible that even if you're a doctor migrated abroad, you will pay for your nephew's education back in Bangladesh. This sounds perfectly reasonable to us, and we think this is the likely outcome in this debate. Now, just in order to make sure that we are not dependent on opening government, a few key pieces of analysis. First of all, about why you can't migrate with your family and give them education abroad. We think the way most of those people migrate is simply migration visas for working visas, because this is what the West wants and allows. We're talking about hospice workers, agriculture workers. All these visas are only for one person. So you just don't have this option. And I think this is a likelier than OG explanation that tells you, look, they're going to do so in shady, scary ways, or they just can't afford it. We think they're just not allowed because this is what the West wants. We think the second key issue that we want to make sure that we're independent from opening government on is the fact that they're actually going to be able to make sufficient money in the West. We think there are two ways we are going to do so in order to be independent. The first one, which I think is important to understand, is note that in the West today, there is a significant number of specific types of jobs, not just general the kind of population that Western workers do not want to do because they consider it beneath their dignity. Specifically, when you live in an urbanized society, working in the fields, living in the city for the field, or going to stay with an elderly person and taking care of them in a culture that celebrates youth rather than the elderly in most of the developing world is very difficult. However, people coming from abroad who are used to taking care of the family, who are used to working in the field, this is trivial, which means that they're going to be able to get these basic jobs. And the second thing that we have to do to show you that this is sufficient is telling you that Even the most minimal wage in the lowest standard of living with the lowest worker protection in the West is massive amounts of money in Niger and Mali, because the basic income is 10 to 100 times more. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether they get worker protection or whether they actually get a job. Just being there is sufficient. For all those reasons, we call on you to propose.
Yeah, we thank the speaker for that speech. And to continue the debate, very proud to call upon member of opposition. Ooh.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick second to arrange my papers. I love the woo because I do the with same with my kiddos at my university. We'll call them out. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, do you want me to ask in chat or voice? Like, what's your preference?
Ask in chat, please. No voice. Yeah. I get confused.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. At the point in which this takes effect, this model in your brain, you have a huge influx of people, and you also have a rise in terrible employers that are offering jobs for these migrants, specifically in countries that OG frames this debate in, when you don't have educated workforce, when you don't have access to human rights indexes, access to human rights information, and to general information that is available in the West. Meaning that it's far more likely for these individuals to migrate to neighborhood countries rather than to West. Meaning, a few structural reasons why this is true. Firstly, because it's easier for you to get a visa, and there is a sense of urgency. If you don't get the money on time, you wait years for your children to get an education, meaning you're likely to go for a process that is far more easier for you. But also there are more people going to these neighboring countries because firstly, they have the education level that matches the jobs that are offered that are not offered in the West, meaning like construction works and stuff like that. But also it's cheaper for you to move, meaning you save up on everything, including airplane tickets, rent, like commodity shit, food, all of these things come into your calculus that you have on site government. But also, you're not educated enough to know what's going on in neighboring countries. You don't know how the human rights violations are. You don't know how corruption indexes work and stuff like that. But thirdly, it's closer for your family to be there. That's why you're not likely to move to the other side of the globe rather than to go here. And if you don't believe this, you just feel more related to Filipinos as a Thailand person than to Germans. That's why you go to Thailand. Examples of this taking effect is workers building Qatari football stadiums for the World Cup, having huge violations in their human rights, having huge violations in their workers' rights just to fund for education here, and they basically get enslaved by these workers. But also it's like working in Thailand, in like Indonesia and Philippines, fishing boats as a Thailand person just to fund education and stuff like that. We believe there are structural reasons why your life is going to be terrible as a person that participates in this. Firstly, because you know there are no information about knowing a lot of these things that will happen when you go there, because you don't watch Vox like media, you don't watch BBC documentaries when you're thinking about doing this. But also there are economical benefits and necessity that force you to take these jobs, that force you to work urgently, as I said. But also there is internal and external pressure for you to contribute in this way, because this is seen as a norm in society. This is seen as the only way for you to move over generational poverty and stuff like that. Meaning employers now have much higher asymmetry of power over migrant workers that come to get this salary. How does this look like? Firstly, they vouch for their worker visa and papers that got them into the country to legally work there. Secondly, they already switched jobs in their home place, meaning they fear coming back and not having a job that they used to have. So that makes them more likely to stay in these terrible conditions, to stay working on the fucking boat, stay working in Qatari World Stadium building. Thirdly, you're likely to agree to not work under a contract because that way you evade taxes and you get more money in your pocket. Meaning you're left without legal support that will help you in the instance of violation of human rights and stuff like that. But also, fourthly, you don't know the language of the country you're going to, meaning you don't have support systems that will help you bridge this gap and stuff like that. This means that majority of people that opt into this model are fucked by violation of human rights, by their dignity being lost, and by long-term existential fear that comes out of you not being able to leave this bad workplace. We believe this takes out OG's case entirely, basically, because this is the likelihood, not West being likely. Also, brain drain argument on OO is contingent on you getting a job on the West. They never proved this, and this is highly speculative. We're going to posit that even if it's true, it's still not worth participating in this model in this way. Now, why is this true? Firstly, because Even if this plays out, you're missing crucial periods of your life and your upbringing of your child, which can never be like taken back. How does this look like? You spend the most wonderful years working in discriminatory environment, not participating in the familiar stuff, not having enough time with your children, with your wife, with your family in general. Why is this crucial piece of framing and crucial years? Firstly, children spend most of their days at home with family during this time, meaning they're studying high school, they don't have responsibilities, they don't have their own family, for instance, and are most dependent on the parents and caregivers. This is why they're spending the most time here. This means that there is highest opportunity for you to form beautiful memories and for you to have beautiful experiences. For example, talking about your child getting a first kiss, talking to them about sexual intercourse, looking the fucking game that they're playing in, but not looking at via WhatsApp video call in another different time zone. This is what you're missing out on, these crucial things that motivated you to have a child in the first place, these crucial things that make you be proud of being a parent and stuff like that. But also, secondly, children are forming their identities, personalities, and hobbies at this time. Why? Because they're at the age in which they have most access to widely different information that shape the way in which they see their interests. Are they going to be an engineer, lawyer, doctor? Are they going to do cricket or football or tennis? Who gives a fuck? I don't know. But this is the period in which they get this information, in which they form these hobbies and interests. But also, they change their social circle, meaning they change the way in which they behave. They change their outlook on life. And you are not there to see it happening. You're there to see it for a WhatsApp video call. And when you get back once in a blue moon, you're seeing a completely different person than you left. This is fucking horrendous. And you're working for that child that is now completely different. I will take opening before I continue.
So Sai already told you why the immigration is done well, but the countries you stay in are the ones you're describing. Thailand, India, they're horrible for economics. It's much safer to get a good job later.
Okay, but comparative is I'm staying with my child. This is already outweighing you guys. Okay, so thirdly, the familial connections are most vulnerable when a person is absent, because the children and the family go through this tectonic shift of now you're moving into college, now the price of reading goes up, now you have to do a lot of these things, but also the kids struggle with authority and pressure during puberty, and this is likely happening in puberty. But no, spoiler alert, you are the person that is causing them the biggest amount of pressure. You're pressuring them from abroad. You're pressuring them to do their homework, to be as active as possible. So this creates a sort of resentment because you're pressuring them and you're not there to give them support when they need. You're not there to provide them with emotional support, with advice that only a parent can provide to their children and stuff like that. So this is terrible, and this puts like enormous pressure on yourself. So in your life, on the West is not going to be that beautiful. You're going to be discriminated at the workplace. Even if you go to the West, you're discriminated. You come back to an empty house and all of these things. Now, this is terrible. Realization of this principle is something that realizes your worst nightmare as a parent. We're proud to stand in opposition. Thank you.
Yeah, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue on some of government side, we're proud to call upon government tweet.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yay. Two clashes in this debate. The first one, is this model actually good for the immigrants? We're talking about the first generation, the blue collar, and the second one, the kids, no matter if they're immigrant or not. The second clash, how it's going to affect people in the original country. We think that we actually win both of those clashes. I want to start with the first one, and we'll start talking about position bench, specifically CO, because they currently talk, so we will remember them. Look, CO try to give you two stuff. In general, try to tell you it's going to be bad to immigrant. Why? Because first, you're just going to have bad situation there. You either going to have hard working condition, or you don't have enough knowledge to know all of the stuff. We think that this by itself is a very limited, to the extent of this is extremely limited. Why? Because people talk between one another, they tell the stories, you have internet and a phone so you can read about those stuff before you go away. But more than that, we think that in many situations, this migration happened to states that those conditions aren't that bad. We're talking about Western values that actually have check and balances, they have media there, they have prevention of those stuff. You have protest against those kind of bad labor rules. You have global organization and NGO who prevent those stuff. And yes, it happened in some situation, as we've seen in the football game that they said, but we think that it's happened in a limited amount of places, and it is reducing drastically throughout society. Meaning that the extent of this is extremely limited. Then what they tell you that the life there is bad because you lose the best year of your life and your ability to connect to your child. Several responses for that. First, we just think that even if you are staying at home and working in the original land, it is extremely likely that you work like a dog to earn any amount of money, so you don't have enough time to be with your kids. Secondly, in many situations, you don't have a job in your current village or city, meaning you need to travel away, so you are not at home for a couple of weeks or months. So again, you just don't see the child. In either situation, this doesn't change. Secondly, we think that the parents actually opt in for this. Yeah, they knew the risk, they knew what is going to happen, and we need to respect their autonomy and their decision to do it. And why do we think that they are doing it? Because we think that the comparative for them is worse. It's harder for you to know that there is no future for your kid. You're going to be unable to provide for a better education. They're going to be unable to find better hospitals. They're going to be unable to live their life that you want. Every parent wants better life for their kids, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves, huge part of themselves, to actually do this. We think that if you don't migrate and allow them better education, you just know that you could have made a difference. You blame yourself daily when you see your child staying at home, when your child tell you that you want to be a lawyer or an astronaut or a scientist and he is just unable to do it. You blame yourself for this. Note, we think that if the situation is terrible, you will do more Zoom calls with your child, or you fly a bit more back home. This is still something which is possible, meaning you are still going to have connection. We think that this not only answers CO, but also answers a lot of what O will tell you about the fact that there is not going to be a lot of racism and not going to feel at home. Parents care more about the future of their kids. I think that puts CO aside. Then O will tell you it's going to be better to stay at home and live like a king. First note, as the motion state, we are in the goal for the kids to be in a position to migrate. We are not forcing anyone to live. If they don't want to opt out and live at the end, they're going to stay at home and live as a king there. But secondly, we just think that you have a better quality of life abroad. You have better hospitals. You have better educational system for the next generation. You have better infrastructure, better ability to find fun activities because you have, even the basic stuff. Yeah, when I'm talking about cinemas, gardens, theme park. This is something which is important. People are not only working to work. People also want better life for their kids and for the next generation. We think that that's why it's actually better for them to migrate and for their kids to migrate. We think that this is enough to win opposition bench in this clash. But how do we win OG then? Because we think that OG do a smart thing. They tell you, yes, it can be done well and you can migrate there. And yes, there are reasons why you're going to be able to find better jobs in the West. Note, first, we have equivalent mechanism of why it's going to be good to migrate and why it's the only way. We think it's at least equivalent to them, but more than that. Note, OG case depend not only on your ability to migrate, to be for the first generation to be a blue collar, but actually the ability and incentive of their kids to be in a better position to get those better jobs, to get this better education. This is a missing link in their case, a missing barrier. Without it, they are not getting to the impact of those kids getting those better jobs in the West. We are the one feeling this burden. We are the one who tell you that this is the stronger incentive. The fact that you're creating hope for those kids, visible incentive, that they understand the importance of it, the fact that their father or mother decided to do that for them to have a better life. This is a viable dream. They get images from their parents. They get gifts from their parents. They hear stories about how New York look like, how Berlin look like. This is something vivid for them. But more than that, the fact that they move to better school make it a better environment. How does it look like? Yeah, it looks like children deciding to do the homework instead of going to play with their friends. Talking about kids deciding not to skip school, doing the extra mile to make themselves unique enough to be in the position to be in those friends. I think that this by itself improves their life. If they're going to migrate and if they are not going to migrate at all, this is what's going to help them improve themselves. We think this is a huge missing value of OG. For that they can't win this clash. I think that this is enough to win. Before I continue, second.
Yeah, so your member tries to mitigate brain drain by claiming that not a significant portion of people will leave, but your impacts rely on a significant amount of people leaving, which means that the
No. Look. even if they don't migrate, we think that some of them won't migrate, they are going to be in a position to build better factories, to work in better hospitals, to innovate because they got this better education. We don't care if they move or not. In both situations, we win and we improve their life. This is critical. And then this actually leads me to the second one, because look, I will tell you, huge brain drain, this is bad. First, as we noted several times, this is not a must from this motion. But look, my partner tell you that we're going to get better education, more teachers, better universities. This affects the people who are going to migrate, people who aren't going to migrate, and the people who are even not a part of this model, because there is a trickling down effect. They can now get better teachers overall. Why this only happen if we have this model? Because only if your model is to compete with the West, you need to be as best as you can. Otherwise, you will send them to maybe better education, but not the best education, meaning you're going to get worse teacher, like less better teacher, going to less better university. This is the thing that improve the education over and over again, make the state itself a place that you can actually have the opposite of brain drain. People who are educated more. We are flipping our case by this. We think that we are giving you what is winning on both of the cases. We call you to support.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech and to sum up the entire debate. Very proud to call upon opposition with. Ooh.
Just give me a minute, please, to arrange like my papers and my thoughts, all that shit.
No problem.
I'll start my speech. 3, 2, 1. Let's first respond fully to the question from the OG. Violations of rights exist only for migrant workers. Why? Because they, number one, don't have political capital in these countries that are nearby, that they have in their home country. There's less empathy of those people who are giving them jobs towards them because they do not see them as people of their own race, of their own nation, all of that. But finally, because you're often indebted to this guy, how this literally works on Thai ships is these Thai people want to move, want to find a job on the Indonesian Sea. They give you documents. Your documents are literally taken away. You cannot get them back. You're indebted to them because they gave you some money in order for you to be able to abroad the ship, live on the ship. And finally, you're often afraid of literally them to violently attacking you, killing you because you are away from your family, away from your community, away from your country, away from any government that tries to do this. Notice, panel, the OG cannot just claim these people just go to the West. No, as per their analysis, these people are people with 6 kids in villages, in countries which do not have good educational opportunities for them, which do not have good jobs for them, which do not have like these basic amenities. This is literally their characterizations. These people go wherever the fuck they can. And most of them will not get jobs in the West. Please, this is literally Disneyland case, that there are millions of jobs in the West. There are no blue-collar workers in the West. Every Western country just wants to import, as they say, hundreds of thousands of migrants. No, they want to import a small amount of educated migrants that can go through 5 courses of opening government, while most migrants will go to a Thailand ship, to Indonesia, because of this pressure that Lucky explains. This is why this is terrible. And for those people who OG says they're not going to the West to live the great life, they're going to be completely fucked, to get these terrible conditions, lowest pay, human rights abuse, oftentimes dying, not being able to fight. They say, oh, there are so many people. They say, oh, but they can negotiate with their boss. No, because there's so much of them, they cannot negotiate with their boss. They are desperate. They cannot negotiate with their boss. They have nowhere to come back to. But okay, let's give a charitable case as well of opening government. Sure, some of these people are going to go to the West. They are going to go inform themselves really well, go give your passport, give million documents, spend days with different services, checking your backgrounds, despite your 6 kids, whatever, like learn 5 courses, whatever. But notice this, these people who can do all of this, they probably would have a decent life at home as well, because they have all this time. They that they have these educational capabilities to learn this. They have access to a wide amount of information. They have access probably to the internet. They are probably a little bit more educated than other people as well. And after I prove to you why these countries will continue growing regardless of this motion, that is going to prove you that there is capacity for them to gain these jobs. Finally, on weighing, money that they gain just cannot buy these experiences that Lucky explains. So a large part of our weighing, just more people get terrible fates, and even if not more people get terrible fates, those fates are so terrible that they are not worth these sometimes decent fate. But secondarily, it is just that money cannot buy you time with your child. Money cannot satisfy that need, and you will have indecent amount of money. Anyway, a random migrant worker is not your wife, and even though you want the best future for your kids are going to have a decent future either way. I just think, okay, to quickly respond to CG, number one, you do not need your mother to go through school and uni to how do you say it, tickle your balls the whole time you will study by yourself because you are probably motivated enough to want to learn and educate yourself. But secondarily, if these universities are completely reliant on migrant workers paying a lot of money to get those kids to enter school, that means that they become more expensive, meaning all those kids who do not have parents who have migrated are now out of education, while in the comparative, these universities would be, okay, maybe worse equipped, but less expensive for these kids to enter, meaning that more people on our side of the couch get in their education. Then let's go to OO and their Belgrade idea. Look, this motion clearly states the goal. They never prove the link from your parent has the goal to give you money to buy, to go abroad, to you actually going abroad with that money to do. Here is a really simple reality check. You want to stay with your friends, with your parents, with your family in a country which you love so much, especially if you are educated and can land a well-paying enough job. They cannot just attack the weakest part of the motion and then just not explain the crucial link while you will actually leave despite a million incentives of you to stay. This means that number one, their brain drain impact is much lessened. It is unclear that they achieve no doctors, no engineers, all of these grandiose shit, but secondarily, they don't prove that these countries will have hospitals, engineering companies, jobs for all of these educated kids. In Serbia, there is literally more doctors than there are places in hospitals. This is the crucial analysis that they're missing, which I will now provide to pull up their case. Their second point is that Elena is really guilty because she left. I don't know what to say, dude. Like this is, if that is your biggest problem, I would kill to be you. Okay. So why these countries would grow either way? Listen, number one, they have resources to be exploited, meaning there are going to be more manufacturing jobs even in these less developed parts of the countries. Number two, you can now be employed online. And this is especially good because you're a cheaper labor force to literally look at AI images and say, this one is this, that one is that. Very low very low level of work for a decent amount of pay because it's still a Western company paying you. Thirdly, low skilled jobs are literally on the rise right now, right? Because there is a need for more of these people, for more products, all this. I will be taking OGS.
Look, jobs in the UAE are better than those in India. We prove this to you because when many people migrate, you have diaspora and support and connections. That's why when my dad moved, he knew people to ask.
From diaspora, your wife and friends which you had since you were literally 15 are much better, and you cannot battle with the Arab Sheikh prince when you have no access to your literal passports and are indebted to some company that is paid for you to live. But also these companies need access to this large market and workforce. They have already expanded as much as they can on the West. They now have to expand in these other countries, get new workforce in order to forever grow, to have more returns to their shareholders, yada, yada, ever expanding capitalist economy. Two responses that OG gives to this. Number one, corruption. I think corruption is great. These people, there are countries which explicitly work more with corrupt countries, such as China, such as Russia, such as United Arab Emirates, because they know that corrupt politician will allow them to do whatever they want in that countries. But there are also companies which work explicitly more in corrupt countries because they know they can get better deals with that corrupt politicians. But secondarily, if you're a politician that's corrupt, you want economic growth, because the more economy grows, the more kaimak you get for yourself and get money in your pockets. Secondarily, overpopulations, to me, that sounds like a large workforce, which if they can be connected to work online, can do a million different jobs, can easily be educated online over courses. Please, clear win from CEO. Thank you.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and we thank everyone for this very enjoyable debate. So congrats again, everyone. And please leave the room as soon as you can so we can deliberate.